The rain hammered against the sidewalks of downtown Seattle with an intensity that seemed to mirror the chaos inside Khalid Al-Mansour's mind. The city's gray November sky hung heavy, swallowing the tops of skyscrapers in thick fog. Khalid sat in the back of his black Mercedes S-Class, staring at his phone screen as the numbers continued their relentless descent. His tech investment firm, Zenith Ventures, was hemorrhaging money. 3 major deals had fallen through in the past month, and his flagship artificial intelligence startup, Quantum Mind AI, was on the verge of collapse due to a critical security breach that had exposed their proprietary algorithms. "Sir, we're approaching the Seattle Convention Center," his driver, Marcus, announced from the front seat. "Traffic is heavy due to the tech conference." Khalid barely acknowledged him. At 42, he had built an empire from nothing, transforming his family's modest oil wealth into a technology powerhouse worth billions. He had graced the covers of Forbes, Wired, and Time magazine. Investment bankers courted him. Politicians sought his advice. Yet now, everything he had built over 15 years was crumbling, and he couldn't understand why. The hack had been sophisticated, far beyond anything his security team had encountered. Someone knew exactly where to strike. "Let me out here," Khalid said abruptly, 5 blocks from the convention center. "Sir, in this rain?" Marcus turned, concerned. "I need to walk. Clear my head. Before you continue with this story, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you enjoy compelling, real-life inspired stories with unexpected twists, hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next narrative. Now, let's get back to Khalid's extraordinary encounter. Khalid stepped onto the wet pavement, his $1,000 Italian shoes immediately soaked. He barely noticed. The rain plastered his tailored suit to his frame as he walked, head down, consumed by the question that had haunted him for weeks. How had someone penetrated 5 layers of military-grade encryption? He turned onto a narrow side street, seeking a shortcut through the financial district. The alley was darker here, lined with dumpsters and the back entrances to restaurants. Steam rose from vents, mixing with the rain to create an almost ethereal fog. That's when he saw him. An older man, perhaps in his 60s, sat huddled beneath a torn tarp stretched between 2 dumpsters. His beard was long and unkempt, streaked with gray, and his clothes were layers of mismatched fabric, all equally tattered and stained. Beside him sat a shopping cart filled with plastic bags, aluminum cans, and what looked like electronic scraps. But what caught Khalid's attention was the device in the man's hands. It appeared to be a laptop, or what remained of one. The screen was cracked, held together with duct tape, and the keyboard was missing several keys. Yet the man's fingers moved across it with practiced precision, his eyes focused intently on the flickering display. Khalid would have walked past, but something made him pause. Perhaps it was the contrast, the juxtaposition of someone so clearly destitute working on technology that seemed almost too advanced for its broken housing. Or perhaps it was the desperate need to think about anything other than his failing empire. "That's an interesting machine you have there," Khalid said, surprising himself with his own curiosity. The man looked up slowly. His eyes were a startling blue, clear and sharp, despite the weathered face that housed them. There was an intelligence there that seemed at odds with his circumstances. He studied Khalid for a long moment before responding. "It does what I need it to do," the man said, his voice rough but articulate. "More than I can say for most expensive tech these days. All flash, no substance." Khalid felt a flicker of amusement despite his mood. "You sound like you know something about technology." "I know enough." The man turned back to his screen, dismissing Khalid with the gesture. But Khalid didn't leave. Something about this interaction felt significant, though he couldn't explain why. "What are you working on?" The man's fingers paused on the keyboard. He looked up again, this time with something that might have been amusement in his eyes. "Why does a man in a $5,000 suit care what a homeless person is doing in an alley? Maybe I'm curious. Maybe I'm avoiding a conference full of people who want to take what's left of my money." The man laughed, a short, dry sound. "Honest, at least. You're that Arab billionaire, aren't you? Khalid Al-Mansour. I've seen your face on the news. Zenith Ventures. Quantum Mind AI." He paused. "And your recent problems." Khalid stiffened. "How do you know about your security breach? It's not exactly a secret in certain circles. Your quantum encryption was supposed to be impenetrable. 5 layers of military-grade security. Biometric authentication. blockchain verification. And yet, someone walked right through it like it was a screen door. The rain continued to fall, but Khalid no longer felt it. "Who are you?" "Someone who used to matter." The man gestured to a relatively dry spot beneath the tarp. "You're getting soaked. Sit, if you can stomach being this close to someone society has forgotten." Khalid hesitated only a moment before sitting. Up close, he could see the man's laptop more clearly. Despite its broken exterior, the code on the screen was sophisticated. Layers of what appeared to be encryption algorithms that he recognized but couldn't quite place. "My name is Thomas," the man said. "Dr. Thomas Whitmore, though the title doesn't mean much anymore. A doctor of computer science. MIT, class of 1985. I worked on some of the earliest encryption protocols for the Department of Defense, helped develop the framework for what would eventually become modern internet security." Thomas's fingers returned to the keyboard. Of course, that was before everything fell apart. Khalid studied the man's profile. What happened? Life happened. Bad decisions. Worse luck. A divorce that took everything. A mental health crisis that the medical system wasn't equipped to handle. Lost my job, my home, my credibility, the usual American story of falling through the cracks. Thomas spoke without self-pity, stating facts as if discussing someone else's life. "But you don't care about my sob story. You care about your problem." "I didn't say I had a problem. You didn't have to. You're walking in the rain instead of preparing for a conference. Your eyes have that look, the one I used to see in the mirror when I was designing systems and knew something was fundamentally wrong but couldn't figure out what. Someone outsmarted you, and you can't understand how." Khalid found himself nodding. The breach was surgical. They knew exactly where to look, what to take. It wasn't random. It was personal. It always is. Thomas stopped typing and turned to face Khalid fully. "You want to know something interesting about modern security? It's built on a fundamental flaw that almost everyone overlooks, which is the assumption that the greatest threat comes from the outside. You build walls, moats, defenses. You encrypt, authenticate, verify, but you forget the most basic principle of security. Trust is a vulnerability. The person who breached your system didn't break in, they were let in." Khalid felt his blood run cold. "You're saying someone on my team?" "I'm saying that sophisticated breaches aren't about breaking encryption. They're about exploiting the human element. Social engineering. Trust. Access granted willingly, often without the person even realizing what they've done." Thomas pulled out a small notebook from his coat. Its pages yellowed and wrinkled. He sketched something quickly. "Your security architecture, if I'm guessing correctly, probably looks something like this." Khalid stared at the diagram. It was remarkably accurate, showing the layered structure of Quantum Mind's security protocols. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I designed the framework your system is based on 30 years ago. I can see its fingerprints in every modern security architecture. And I can see its weaknesses." Thomas tapped the diagram. "Here, this authentication layer. It requires verification from a senior administrator, correct?" "Yes. Only 3 people have that level of access. Myself, my CTO, and my head of security. 3 points of failure." Thomas looked at him steadily. "Tell me about your CTO." Khalid felt defensive rising. "David Chen has been with me for 8 years. He's brilliant, loyal, completely trustworthy." "Loyal to you or loyal to his own interests?" "That's an unfair question." "Is it?" "In my experience, the word loyal is often a substitute for I haven't looked closely enough." "What do you know about David's financial situation? His personal life? His resentments?" Khalid opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. The truth was, he didn't know much. David was private, professional. They had dinner occasionally, talked about the company, about technology, but personal details. David had mentioned a sick mother once, medical bills, a brief comment about needing to help his sister with her mortgage. Nothing unusual. "You're reaching," Khalid said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe, but someone with administrative access opened a door. The question is whether they knew they were doing it." Thomas returned to his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "There's a technique, fairly sophisticated, that allows someone to embed executable code within seemingly benign files, documents, spreadsheets, even images. The user opens the file, never knowing they've just granted access to someone else. We scan for that. We have protocols written by someone who might be compromised." Thomas paused, then turned the cracked screen toward Khalid. "This is a trace I've been following for the past few weeks. There's been chatter in certain underground forums about a major tech acquisition coming up. Rumors about Quantum Mind's AI algorithms being shopped around, not to competitors, but to a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands." Khalid leaned closer. The screen showed fragments of conversations, encrypted messages, Transaction records. How did you access this? You'd be surprised what you can do with discarded equipment and too much time. People throw away hard drives that aren't properly wiped, routers that still have authentication cached. I've built a network of information from scraps. Thomas scrolled through the data. This Shell Corporation, it's owned by a holding company, which is owned by another holding company. Layers of obfuscation. But if you follow the money far enough, there's a pattern. 3 significant investments in failed tech startups over the past 5 years. Each one collapsed after a similar security breach. You're suggesting an organized operation. I'm suggesting someone has figured out how to weaponize corporate espionage. They don't just steal data. They destroy companies from the inside, buy the assets for pennies, and rebuild them under new ownership. It's brilliant, in a sociopathic sort of way. Khalid's phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Conference starting in 30 minutes. Investors asking for you. He ignored it. Why are you telling me this? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Because I know what it's like to lose everything. To watch something you built crumble because you didn't see the threat until it was too late. And because, he hesitated, because I'm tired of being invisible. For 10 years, I've been living on these streets, and people look through me like I'm a ghost. You're the first person in months who's actually talked to me like I'm human. The honesty in Thomas's voice was startling. Khalid felt a rush of shame. How many times had he walked past homeless people without a second glance? How easily had he dismissed entire categories of human beings as irrelevant to his world? Help me, Khalid said suddenly. Not for charity, not for pity. Help me because you're clearly brilliant, and I need someone who thinks differently than everyone in my company. Thomas studied him. And what do I get in return? A chance to matter again. Real resources, not scraps. And if we figure this out, if we save Quantum Mind, a job, a real one, with salary, benefits, housing, you'd hire a homeless man? I'd hire the person who might be the only one who can save my company. The rest is just circumstance. Thomas was silent for a long moment. Then he closed his laptop carefully, wrapping it in plastic to protect it from the rain. All right, but we do this my way. No corporate politics. No committees. Just you, me, and the problem. Agreed. They emerged from the alley into the rain-soaked street. Khalid called Marcus, directing him to their location. While they waited, Thomas stood beside him, looking almost surreal in his tattered layers next to Khalid's expensive suit. Where do we start? Khalid asked. With your CTO. We need to examine his computer, his access logs, everything, but carefully. If he is involved, we can't let him know we're looking. The Mercedes pulled up. Marcus's eyes widened at the sight of Thomas, but to his credit, he said nothing, as Khalid gestured for Thomas to get in. They drove through Seattle's rain-darkened streets toward Zenith Ventures headquarters, a glass tower in the South Lake Union district. In the car, Khalid made calls, rearranging his schedule, postponing the conference appearance. His assistant, Jennifer, protested, but he was firm. Some instinct told him that this strange encounter was more important than any networking event. Tell me about the breach, Thomas said as they drove. Details. When did you first notice? 3 weeks ago. Our monitoring systems detected unusual data transfer activity at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. By the time our security team investigated, 23 gigabytes of proprietary code had been copied to an external server. 3:17 a.m. Off hours. Someone who knew the security team's schedule. Thomas made notes in his weathered notebook. The external server. Where was it located? That's the strange part. The IP address traced back to our own backup facility in Portland. But when we checked, there was no record of the transfer. Because the logs were altered. Sophisticated work. Thomas looked out the window at the passing buildings. Your head of security. What did they conclude? That it was an external attack. Possibly state-sponsored given the sophistication. China or Russia, most likely. They recommended increasing our defensive measures, hiring additional security consultants. Convenient conclusion. Diverts attention from internal possibilities. Thomas turned to Khalid. The person you need to worry about is often the one directing your focus elsewhere. They arrived at the tower. Khalid led Thomas through the lobby, ignoring the stares from employees and security guards. He used his executive access to take them directly to the 40th floor, where Zenith Ventures occupied the entire level. The office was modern, all glass walls and open concepts, designed to promote collaboration. Engineers worked at standing desks, their screens filled with complex code. In the corner office, Khalid could see David Chen through the glass walls, on a phone call, gesturing animatedly. That's him, Khalid said quietly. David Chen, my CTO. Thomas observed David with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. How long has he been on that call? Khalid checked his watch. I don't know. Why? Body language. He's stressed. Not normal work stress. Fear. Thomas pointed to David's hand, which was rubbing his temple repeatedly. That's a self-soothing gesture. Whatever conversation he's having, It's not pleasant. They watched as David ended the call and slumped in his chair, running both hands through his hair. For a moment, his professional mask slipped, and Khalid saw something he'd never noticed before. Exhaustion, not from work, but something deeper, desperation. We need access to his computer, Thomas said. Tonight, when he's gone. That's necessary, if you want the truth. Thomas looked at him. You brought me here to help. Let me help. Khalid made a decision. All right, but I'm coming with you. They spent the afternoon in Khalid's office. Thomas, still in his tattered clothes, sat at Khalid's desk and commandeered his computer. Khalid's staff were clearly disturbed, but none dared question their CEO's strange guest. Thomas worked with remarkable speed, his fingers navigating through systems and databases with practiced ease. He pulled up financial records, access logs, email archives. Khalid watched, fascinated by the older man's methodology. It wasn't random searching. Thomas seemed to know exactly where to look, what patterns to identify. Here, Thomas said after 2 hours. Look at this. On the screen was a series of financial transactions from David Chen's personal bank account. Large deposits, each for exactly $15,000, appearing monthly for the past 6 months. Could be legitimate, Khalid said, though his stomach was tightening. Consulting fees, maybe. Coming from where? Thomas clicked through the transaction details. The deposits originate from a financial services company in Panama. Want to guess what else is based in Panama? The Shell Corporation you mentioned. Not directly, but follow the money 3 levels deep, and you find the same holding company. Thomas pulled up another screen. But here's what's interesting. The timing of these deposits. They start 6 months ago, right around the time your company announced the Quantum Mind AI breakthrough. Someone knew you were about to become very valuable. Khalid felt sick. David wouldn't. Look at this. Thomas opened an email archive, showing messages between David and an unknown sender. The emails were encrypted, but Thomas had somehow decrypted them. The contents made Khalid's blood run cold. I can't keep doing this. You don't have a choice. Your mother's treatment costs $40,000 a month. There has to be another way. There isn't, unless you want to watch her die. The emails went on, each one more damning than the last. David had been coerced into providing access. His mother's cancer treatment held hostage by someone who understood leverage better than any encryption. He's a victim, Thomas said quietly. That doesn't excuse what he's done, but it explains it. Someone found his pressure point and exploited it ruthlessly. Who? That's what we need to find out tonight. At 7 p.m., the office began to empty. David was one of the last to leave, and through the glass walls, Khalid saw his CTO pause at his desk, looking back as if sensing something wrong. Then he was gone, disappearing into the elevator. Khalid and Thomas waited 30 minutes to ensure everyone had left. The building was quiet, the lights on timers casting long shadows across the open workspace. They made their way to David's office. Thomas pulled out a small toolkit from one of his many pockets. Within seconds, he had bypassed the biometric lock on David's computer. Old school, he muttered. Sometimes the best hacks are the simple ones. David's computer came to life. Thomas navigated through files with surgical precision, looking for something specific. He found it in a hidden directory, buried beneath layers of mundane work files. Remote access software, Thomas said, his voice tight. This is how they got in. David installed it thinking it was a legitimate security update, but it's been giving someone complete access to your systems for months. Can you trace it? I can try. Thomas's fingers flew across the keyboard. Lines of code scrolled past on the screen, too fast for Khalid to follow. The connection is active. Right now. Someone is in your system at this very moment. Shut it down. Not yet. If we shut it down, they'll know we've discovered it. Better to follow it. See where it leads. Thomas pulled out his ancient laptop, connecting it to David's computer with a series of cables that looked like they'd been salvaged from a dozen different devices. I'm going to piggyback on their connection. Trace it back to the source. They waited in tense silence as Thomas worked. Minutes stretched into an hour. The city lights beyond the windows created a glittering backdrop to this strange scene. A billionaire and a homeless man, working together in the dark. Got it, Thomas finally said. The connection originates from, well, this is interesting. Where? This building. 2 floors down. Your head of security's office. The revelation hit Khalid like a physical blow. Marcus, but he's been with me since the beginning. He helped me build the security infrastructure, which gave him intimate knowledge of every weakness. Thomas continued typing. And look at this. He's accessing your personal files right now. Bank accounts, investment strategies, private communications. He's not just stealing from the company, he's stealing your entire life. Khalid's mind raced. Marcus Rodriguez had been more than an employee, he'd been a friend. They'd celebrated birthdays together, vacationed with their families. How long had Marcus been planning this betrayal? We need to call the police, Khalid said. Not yet. Thomas was still focused on his screen. If we bring in law enforcement now, he'll destroy evidence, disappear into his network of shell corporations. We need absolute proof, something that can't be disputed, and we need to know who else is involved. What do you suggest? Thomas smiled, and for the first time, Khalid saw a glimpse of the brilliant scientist he must have been. We give him exactly what he wants. We let him think he's won. Over the next hour, Thomas explained his plan. It was risky, requiring precise timing and a degree of deception that made Khalid uncomfortable. But he trusted this strange man who had appeared in an alley like an answer to a prayer. They worked through the night, Thomas crafting an elaborate trap using Marcus's own systems against him. They created fake financial documents suggesting Khalid was about to sell Quantum Mind to a Chinese investment firm for an astronomical sum. They planted emails discussing the deal, made it look like Khalid was trying to hide the transaction from his board of directors. He won't be able to resist, Thomas said. If he thinks you're about to sell, he'll accelerate his timeline, try to steal the sale right out from under you. And when he does, we'll have him. As dawn broke over Seattle, washing the city in weak gray light, they finished their preparation. Khalid was exhausted, running on adrenaline and coffee. Thomas, by contrast, seemed energized, more alive than he'd appeared in the alley. Now we wait, Thomas said. Go to your meetings. Act normal. Let him think everything is proceeding according to his plan. Khalid went through the motions of his day in a daze. Morning meetings, conference calls, reviews of quarterly projections. All the while, his phone buzzed with updates from Thomas, who had set up monitoring equipment in an empty office. At 2 p.m., Marcus requested an emergency meeting. We've detected unusual activity, Marcus said, his face a perfect mask of concern. Someone is attempting to access your personal financial accounts. I think your Chinese deal may have been compromised. Khalid felt cold fury, but kept his expression neutral. What do you recommend? We need to move quickly. I've prepared emergency protocols to secure the transaction, but I'll need your authentication credentials to implement them. There it was, the ask. The final betrayal. Marcus wanted the keys to everything, the ability to steal not just the company, but Khalid's entire fortune. Of course, Khalid said calmly, whatever you need to protect the deal. He provided the credentials, codes that Thomas had assured him would lead Marcus into a digital trap. They watched as Marcus returned to his office, confidence in his stride. He's taking the bait, Thomas's voice came through Khalid's earpiece. He's accessing the accounts now and... Yes, he's redirecting funds to offshore accounts. We've got him. But Thomas's voice suddenly changed, becoming urgent. Wait, there's something else. He's not working alone. There's another connection, someone he's communicating with. Someone in your conference call right now. Khalid looked around the conference room where he sat with his executive team, 10 people, all of whom he'd trusted implicitly. Who? Running facial recognition on the encrypted video call Marcus is on. Give me a second. Okay, got it. It's your CFO. Catherine Wright. Khalid looked across the table at Catherine, who was reviewing spreadsheets, her expression pleasant and professional. She'd been with Zenith for 5 years, recruited from Goldman Sachs, brilliant with numbers, ruthless in negotiations. He'd valued those qualities. Now he wondered what else he'd missed. Are you sure? He whispered into the earpiece. Positive. She and Marcus have been planning this together. They're both accessing the trap accounts right now, probably congratulating themselves on outsmarting you. Khalid stood abruptly. Excuse me, everyone. I need to step out for a moment. In the hallway, he called building security, then the FBI field office. Within 20 minutes, federal agents were sweeping into the building. Khalid led them to Marcus's office, where they found the head of security frantically trying to delete files. The confrontation was brief. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Marcus crumbled. He'd been drowning in gambling debts, he admitted. Catherine had approached him 2 years ago with a proposition: help her systematically loot Zenith Ventures, and she'd clear his debts and make him wealthy. They'd been siphoning money for months, building toward the big score, the complete theft of Quantum Mind's AI technology. Catherine was arrested in the conference room, her professional composure finally cracking as handcuffs were placed on her wrists. She said nothing, but the hatred in her eyes as she looked at Khalid was answer enough. As the agents led them away, Khalid stood in his office, trying to process the scope of the betrayal. 2 people he'd trusted, 2 people who'd been part of his inner circle, had been systematically destroying everything he'd built. Thomas appeared in the doorway, still wearing his tattered clothes, incongruous against the modern corporate backdrop. It's over, he said simply. How did you know? Khalid asked. How did you see what I couldn't? Because I've been invisible for 10 years. When people can't see you, you learn to see them, really see them. Not their masks, their positions, their credentials. You see their desperation, their fear, their capacity for both kindness and cruelty. Thomas walked to the window, looking out over the city. You were so focused on building your empire that you forgot to look at the people building it with you. I owe you everything. You owe me a job, remember? Thomas turned, and there was a hint of humor in his expression. Though I'll need some new clothes. Over the following weeks, the full extent of Marcus and Catherine's conspiracy emerged. They'd stolen over $40 million, compromised 3 major clients, and had been planning to sell Quantum Minds technology to a competing firm for $200 million. David Chen, the CTO, had been an unwitting pawn, coerced into providing access through threats against his mother. Khalid chose not to press charges against David, instead helping him find treatment for his mother and a fresh start at a different company. Thomas Whitmore was given a position as Chief Security Architect at Zenith Ventures. He accepted on the condition that he could also establish a foundation to help homeless individuals with technical skills find employment in the tech industry. There are hundreds like me, Thomas explained, as they toured a new facility funded by Khalid. People who fell through the cracks, but still have brilliant minds. The tech industry talks about diversity, but they ignore an entire population of talent living on the streets. The foundation became one of Zenith's most successful initiatives, discovering and employing dozens of highly skilled individuals who had been dismissed by society. Within a year, it had expanded to 6 cities, changing lives and challenging prejudices about homelessness. 3 months after that rainy day in the alley, Khalid stood in a newly renovated apartment in downtown Seattle. It was modest by his standards, but luxurious for someone who'd been living under a tarp. Thomas walked through the rooms, his cleaned and trimmed appearance making him almost unrecognizable from the man Khalid had first encountered. "It's too much," Thomas said, though his eyes were bright with emotion. "It's not enough," Khalid replied. "You saved my company, but more than that, you reminded me what matters. I'd built an empire, but I'd forgotten how to see people." Thomas nodded slowly. "We both learned something then. I'd forgotten that being invisible doesn't mean being worthless, that circumstances don't define capability." They stood at the window, looking out over the city where their unlikely friendship had begun. In the distance, rain clouds were gathering again over Seattle's skyline. "You know what's funny?" Thomas said. "Marcus and Catherine thought they were so clever. All their elaborate schemes, their encrypted communications, their offshore accounts. But they made the same mistake everyone makes." "What's that?" "They underestimated the person they couldn't see. They looked at you and saw a billionaire to be exploited. They looked at me and saw nothing at all. That blindness, that certainty that they understood everything was their downfall." Khalid smiled. "And now? Now we build something better. A company where people aren't invisible, where talent is recognized regardless of circumstance, where trust is earned but also verified." Thomas turned from the window. "And we watch for the next person sitting in an alley because you never know who might be brilliant beneath the surface." As Khalid drove home that evening, he took a different route, one that passed through the alley where he'd first met Thomas. The tarp was gone, the makeshift shelter dismantled, but he slowed the car, remembering that moment when his life had changed. A young woman sat where Thomas had been, huddled against the cold, a broken tablet in her hands. Khalid hesitated, then pulled over. He got out of the car and walked toward her, aware that he was about to begin another unexpected conversation. "That's an interesting device you have there," he said, echoing the words he'd spoken months ago. The woman looked up, suspicious and wary, but there was intelligence in her eyes. "It does what I need it to do," she replied. Khalid smiled. "You know, I run a company that's always looking for talented people. Would you be interested in telling me what you're working on?" As they began to talk, rain started to fall again on Seattle's streets, washing the city clean, bringing with it the possibility of new beginnings and the reminder that sometimes the most valuable insights come from the most unexpected places. The Arab billionaire had learned his lesson well. Never judge a book by its cover. Never assume you know someone's worth. And always be willing to see what others overlook. Because genius doesn't always wear a suit, and salvation doesn't always arrive in the form you expect. Sometimes it comes in tattered clothes, sitting in an alley, waiting for someone to finally see.